Greetings. Today I'd like to talk to you about a very simple spear phishing use case utilizing ThreatQ and ThreatQ investigations. What you see on the screen here is an evidence-based board utilizing ThreatQ investigations. It's a node-based view that shows the relationships between different objects or pieces of information that have been stored within the ThreatQ threat library. This particular investigation that we're looking at, again on spear phishing activity within a targeted environment, has already been completed. But we'll step through the different parts and pieces of this investigation and why we think they're valuable and how this investigation was actually built out from the beginning. It is important to note that ThreatQ is not necessarily a detection tool. The three different spear phishing events that we see on the screen here, in this case, one referred to as we received a secure document, and then with very simple names following down, secure document 2 and secure document 3, were all spear phishing activity that was detected either by a human user or by a form of a security detection that we would integrate with, whether it's through an email-based ingestion or another single point integration that we would want to put in place, or a bidirectional integration that we would want to put in place, depending upon the tool in question. One important thing to point out in the way that we look at information within ThreatQ is to talk a little bit about how this would be viewed if you're looking at it from a standard security operations center or from an incident response standpoint or within one of those tools. And the way I like to describe that is we have a first event that came into the system here. What I've got is a view of that data over in a context explorer. And that's going to go through and give me the information that we have as we would see from an alert. I have attributes, in our case talking about who sent it, what was the subject line, who was the recipient of that one, a content type, and other pieces of information. I also have information around the actual file that was attached to this as part of the malicious payload itself, which we can see has actually been listed. It's over here to the left-hand side. Now, if I'm looking at it from a SOC or from an IR specialist perspective, I'm going to look at this based around a timeline, which is going to tell me when that event or when that alert was actually seen within my detection tool. And if I'm the only one that's utilizing this, or I'm the specialist in the system, then I have a chance of remembering that this particular subject line or this file or this doc file that was attached to that. However, if I am in a global SOC or a multi-location SOC, or if I have multiple people within the same SOC that may be working on the same on differing alerts, or the same situation within IR, if I have these three different spear phishing events that occur over a range of time, or they occur simultaneously and they go to multiple people, not everyone is going to know or recognize a subject line or a file name from the very beginning. So we want to be able to talk about grouping these pieces of information together, these three individual events that may have passed by the notice of a SOC or a larger SOC or a complex IR organization, to be able to roll that back and look at it from an intel analyst standpoint. And the way that we'll do that is through a different integration that we have over on the left-hand side here. In this case, we've integrated with the sandbox, threat grid to be specific. And what occurred was a spear phishing activity occurred, say for example number 1 over here. That document file that was attached to that file, or that malicious file that was attached to the email, was forwarded over either automatically or as part of a workflow, or the user themselves added that into a sandbox, and then the analyst was waiting to see what would come out of that. In our case, we got a response that came back and a score that was affiliated to that one. And I have all of the attributes and the other pieces of information that were important to this one. The ones in particular that I'm going to be looking for and that I can build a search for to find are going to be a threat grid score and threat grid of max severity. So I'm going to look for that and say, hey, what do I have new that's been detonated in a sandbox that has a score higher than a particular number along with a severity higher than a particular number? And these are the things that I feel are very dangerous to my organization, and I want to drill in and start looking at those particular tools or those particular pieces. In this case, we've brought that piece of data in. We also have two indicators that were also brought in as part of that. And if you notice, these are relatively low scored. Again, ThreatQ does dynamic scoring of indicators based on a particular company's policy. So these indicators in and of themselves aren't necessarily dangerous. So I might not push these to a sandbox, or sorry, push these to an architecture or move these around or send them to a SIM. But what I am interested in is when I start looking at the other detail and data that's here, I have the file that was associated, in this case 3 separate files, one being the report, and then actually the same sample file was seen twice. But when I click on that sample file, here, I see that it has 4 events that are associated to this one. 3 of them being the spear phishing events that we were talking about over on this right-hand side. Now, the point here is that as the analyst, as the Intel analyst, or as another analyst, I'm looking at it from that 12 or 15,000 foot level. I'm able to see across time based on the relationships that have been added into the system. I'm not dealing with alert or incident or notification as I would be if I'm working within the Security Operations Center or if I'm working in incident response. I'm able to step back, look a little higher, and say, hey, I have seen this file before. And actually, I've seen it in 3 separate occasions across a wide range of time if necessary, because I have the full timeline down here across the bottom. So I can look at any one of these events and to see when those were actually seen. Were they seen within 3 days? Were they seen within 3 minutes? Were they seen within 3 weeks or 3 months? The time frame is not important. The relationships are. What that also then gives me the ability to do, and let's scroll this out a little bit, is to start looking at other additional information. And in this case, I've got indicators that have been affiliated to this, each one being the recipient's email account, and I don't want them blocked within my system, so I've actually gone through and added a status of whitelisting for each one of those. But what I find is interesting is I've also gone through and built out associations or identities rather, for those individual indicators, another object that can be created and supported within the ThreatQ system. In this case, within the identities, I'm able to look at the different attributes that are associated to this. In this case, because I've built my own custom indicators or built my own custom attributes and pulled in that information, I can see that the one thing that is common across all 3 of these is the fact that they have a business unit association with finance. So what we now see is that what looked to be maybe 1 or 2 or very simple form of spearfish that was seen within the system, by looking at it from a slightly higher level, from a ticket or a alert standpoint, I'm able to see a pattern emerge that shows me that, hey, my finance unit, business unit, is actually being targeted by a specific user or by a specific activity utilizing this same file. It's not sophisticated, but it is targeted. Now, also what we can do, because now that we know that we potentially have a problem, we have to fix that. So I can go through and add this into a campaign from a tracking perspective and start looking at those courses of actions, the attack patterns affiliated to the spear phishing attachments, then to look down to mitigation. So very, very simple on, hey, we need to do some understanding to the business unit itself, to finance, that we potentially have a spear phishing problem ongoing or activity targeted to them. So we want to go through and actually create a task, which is to perform training on spear phishing with that financial department. Try to get them up to speed, let them start to understand, to be a little bit more discerning when looking at emails and not just opening everything that comes in that says it's, say, for example, a proposal or a PO or anything along those lines within finance itself. So that's the human way of addressing it. Let's step back and talk about addressing it from the architectural standpoint. Because also, by utilizing external information, I'm able to go through and determine that this file, when it's imploded through the sandbox, is actually TrickBot. So it's a known piece of malware within the system that is known and recognized in the outside world, which then gives me other attack patterns that I can look at, whether we're talking about system network configuration discoveries or data from local systems, these techniques or patterns that we can utilize to start further lining down what can we do from a mitigation standpoint, which in this case is we want to go through and actually do some specific huntings for those TTPs. What are some of the things that we can put in place or that we already have within our environment and our infrastructure that would help protect or mitigate TrickBot activity, and also where are those located? Are they located deep within my security stack and they exist on my endpoint and EDR capabilities? Or are there things closer to the edge that I could start to deploy that would potentially mitigate this issue from the beginning within the system?